is we look at like the burning questions of each of the tournament as a whole. Well, we know the appetite for the games we haven't seen in years will probably be quite, and hopefully be quite large. What is the appetite like for games that we have already seen regularly at a state level? Does the championship shine rub off on those games that might at an NPL level have felt stale? Because as much as there will be fascination in Apia taking on Metro Stars in the opening weekend, in Sydney United taking on Bayswater, next Friday, the standalone game will be a game that we've seen many a time in the local competition when West Apia face Sydney United, and that is but one example of something that will happen across the groups. Obviously, Preston will play Avondale. Less worried about that one for obvious reasons. Marconi have got to do Wolves home and away. So these teams, by the end of this year, will have played each other 4 times. So whether or not that extra sheen with maybe a few more stars added to the rosters, that's another important question for this competition to answer. Like in terms of what fans who are watching Lockie, and we're trying to obviously take learnings out of this. What do you think are the big questions? What are the things that people should be going in and interrogating with each of the games they watch from a non-footballing perspective, perhaps? I know I've put you on the spot there a little bit.
No. Look, I think to just go quickly to your point about, what does the championship shine of an Apia Sydney United clash look like? The fact is we don't know the answer to that question, and it goes back to that theory of data collection and learning and all of these questions that people have had for years, if not decades, about what would happen if we did something like this. We're about to find out. And I think to some extent, not completely perhaps, but to some extent, that does make this competition a success already, because we're going to learn the answers to these questions. So people are obviously going to be looking at attendances. They're obviously going to be looking at atmosphere and how many people watch on TV and what the quality of the football is like as well. The fact is that we're going to get a starting point for whatever is going to happen in the next 5-10 years. Best case scenario, the SBS get killer ratings. It gives a lot more reason for commercial interest going into the following seasons of the championship. But even to play devil's advocate in a worst case scenario, at least we kind of know what our metrics are. We have some idea of what we need to make it successful. And then we can start thinking about a plan that can bridge those two things together. So this really is a fact-finding mission. And we all hope that the crowds are going to be big, just outside of the big ticket games as well. Hopefully Apia Sydney United gets a good, uptick in crowd because of the allure of the championship. Hopefully there is, history created from a Bayswater City 95th minute winner over Metro Stars that then, is revisited in 3 years when they're drawn together again in the Australia Cup or something. We want more of that history intertwining. And obviously the numbers are the easier ones to point to in terms of success. But just learning about what this competition might be and seeing how it interacts with the general football public, I think is a success in the first place. And then hopefully we can go and build from there.
The fundamental excitement for me, Lockie, is just, it's been, and for probably many of the people listening to this podcast, it's been 2 decades since we really had something new. Now, it's not a full home and away format. There is a resemblance to an NPL final system that we've had in the past, but it is this championship competition, the way it's currently set up, is not permanent, is subject to change depending on how the first 2 years go, but B, unique in its nature. We haven't had something fresh and innovative really for 2 decades in the domestic football as the A-League has been, charging along in place of the NSL. So I think that the main thing is just, it's so exciting to have something fresh to sink our teeth into.
Absolutely. Something fresh. It feels like progress as well. I think a lot of people, including myself, and I'm sure you as well to some degree, have this utopian vision of hopefully what Australian football can be one day. And a lot of that includes, open leagues and pathways and, just the different segments of Australian football coming together and hopefully unifying in some way, and just allowing all these clubs with such storied history to, be able to present themselves on the national stage. And yeah, having something new, obviously, as you alluded to, it's a championship format. It's not quite the home and away league yet, which is, most people will agree is where we want to be. But this is that's going to be a big marker of this season is, getting all the data and figuring out, what this competition will look like. And hopefully from that information, we can then assess the road forward in terms of how we get other clubs, keen enough to make the same commitments as our 8 inaugural clubs, to hopefully get that quorum to go to the home and away season.
And it's interesting, right? So much of the discussion space is occupied by, and somewhat by necessity in Australian football, I guess, success or failure. Will this work? Will it won't work? But I think what gets underestimated in that conversation is actually the opportunity we have to learn. We now have 6-8 weeks, if you include the finals, of fresh information, questions that have been lingering over the game at a large level for such a long time. If these clubs, these historic clubs, particularly the foundation clubs, return to a national stage, will these latent potential or dormant fans follow instead? Will aspirational clubs at this level have a pathway to look to? We now have a basis to start answering those questions that have, if you've been around the traps in NPL for the last 5-10 years, are always scuttlebutt in the stands. They're always lingering questions. B-League this, B-League that. It's the first time in a long time that the first time ever we've had the chance to answer these sorts of questions. And it's funny, Lockie, we're obviously recording this the night after the 2025 Australia Cup final, which of course feels like a cup the way it's broken out and broken down with the success of Heidelberg United has provided this really perfect runway for the Australian Championship in terms of signalling the readiness of the second tier's best and brightest, both on and off the pitch. But I have to admit, when the Australia Cup key dates were announced initially, I thought that it was quite odd that the final itself was such a long time after all the other rounds. We really raced from the round of 32 to the quarters and the semis at a record pace. It's never gone that quickly, those stages of the tournament. I know that for a fact. But then we had this almost month-long gap from the semis to the final. And I think it was only last night, sitting down watching the game, that it made sense. Here is this, and for Football Australia's perspective, the fact that it was NPL, VA League, I don't think it could have been positioned any better a week before the championship. Here is sort of what things might be on offer in what's to come, because the football on the pitch, but more importantly from our perspective, the 10,000 crowd, the way Lakeside looked with the extra cameras as a free-to-air game, sets a very appetizing picture for having that at the exact same venue or having something similar in a week's time.
Yeah, absolutely. And, over the last couple of years, we've had these little tastes of what the Australian Championship might look like. We saw Preston get drawn up against South Melbourne in the Doherty Cup back when, Preston were in VPL 1, and obviously they've played league games in NPL since. We've had the state final series, which obviously draw big crowds, and we've just got that little hint of, the potential of what these clubs on a national stage can be. And you're absolutely right. The Australia Cup final on Saturday night was the culmination of that. Absolutely loved being there in person. The atmosphere was amazing. And I think it's really great as well, the fact that we got a story like this before the championship actually started. If this happens in a year or two's time, then you're looking back at, potentially the benefits of what we hope the Australian Championship will be and point towards a club like Heidelberg's development. But because it's happened before that whole process, what we're seeing is as you kind of said, the NPL clubs really knocking down the door hard and saying, hello, we're here. Let us in, let us on this stage. And yeah, look, Heidelberg had an extraordinary cup run before this season. No club in this modern version of the Australia Cup had recorded more than 3 cup sets against A-League sides, and then Heidelberg decided to go and do that all in one run and not concede a goal while they're at it. So on the field, absolutely, they're killing it, and hopefully they can continue that. Obviously unlucky last night, but off the field as well, the feeling was amazing. And to be there in the ground, obviously there was a core Heidelberg support, but it also really felt like there was a very solid kind of Victorian football presence that wanted to be there for the occasion of what it was. It was really the curtain raiser to what we're going to see next week. And, a little bit of NPL versus A-League as well, I'm sure, but all in kind of hope and motivation for the potential of what we're going to see across the next 8 or so weeks.
It certainly whet the appetite. But as we get into the discussing each of the groups today and what they're sort of going to look like, what will be important, I think that element you've just touched on there is such a critical part across all groups. We know that, or we hope that certain clubs, particularly the more established ones, will have fans that come out of the woodwork. But what is the appeal? What is the dangling carrot for the neutral observer? What is the reason to turn up to a game that they don't support? Now, my personal view is that for many of these games and groups that we'll talk about, there will be plenty. But that is what is going to sustain and really be, I think, a marker for the health of this competition. The promising signs are that between, we saw a 5,000 crowd at the NPL Grand Final between Rockdale and Apia in New South Wales. There have been solid crowds elsewhere, but also in addition to that Australia Cup final, 8,000 between Heidelberg and Dandenong City. And, Dandenong City obviously had that Croatian contingent sort of pulling together. But there was a lot of neutral observers at that one too who were just interested in the spectacle of that game. And if this competition is going to succeed, I think it needs to capture the minds not just of those who have lost interest in the game or in their club, but the ones who may not have an interest in a particular club as well. There's a lot of sensitivity, I think, around the concept of new in Australian football, and I think some of that is influenced by the fact that we can, I think, be perfectionist. And we have good reason for that, because unless things are maybe not perfect, but unless things are very good in Australian football, sometimes they don't work out. Being okay is not necessarily enough. And we've seen things rise and fall over time for that exact reason. And no one's sitting here, I think, expecting this to be perfect. This is not being presented as, well, you want life beyond, you want a competition beyond the A-League. This is the utopian version. This is the final draft of what it's going to look like that we're hitting publish on this week. But it is a step, and we will take information from the good, and we will take information from the bad. And I feel like that is what people should be looking at over the course of this tournament. What is working, what isn't, and use that to drive the discussion. And hopefully, Lockie, over the course of this championship season, with a band of merry men and many others in tow, those are the questions that this show will get to interrogate.
Absolutely. I think you summed it up brilliantly. It's going to be an amazing watch. I'm so excited. I can't wait for it to get started. And as you say, it's a step in the direction of whatever personally you believe to be, the aspirational, there you go again, future of Australian football. But it is the first step, hopefully, in many. And I can't wait to watch it unfold and hopefully discuss it with you as we go through.